from this compulsory veganism. Look, your speaker from Viva, which is a very hardline animal rights organisation, attempts to talk about the environment and other issues, but really this to them is about animal rights. They don't believe in a world where we should use animals. I completely disagree with the speaker. I respect her right to say that, of course, but I completely disagree. And that's why the NHS and public bodies just shouldn't be getting involved in things that are so controversial.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good evening. You're watching State of the Nation on GB News with me, Alex Armstrong. Yes, I'm covering for Matt Goodwin tonight, but don't fret. You're still going to get detailed analysis on all of today's top stories and unfiltered opinions from my brilliant panel and guests. On State of the Nation tonight, the government has doubled down on its stubbornness to not have a national inquiry into grooming gangs. But as a bombshell poll reveals, the public are hugely in support of one. Will this fuel the government's spiralling popularity crisis? And will the historic Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal bring an end to those weekly Palestine marches that have wreaked havoc on our streets? And also, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has made her first major speech of 2025, aiming to regain voters' trust. But with Reform ahead of them in the polls now, well, in some polls at least, is she just flogging a dead horse? Well, I'll be speaking to newly defected Reform UK councillor. Plus, with more economic stagnation revealed in today's GDP figures, tonight I'll be speaking to a business leader who has called for a general election. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined by my panel, former Conservative Minister Steve Baker and founder of Navarro Media, Aaron Bastani. And as ever, let me know your views at gbnews.com/yoursay and send your opinions to me on X at Alex H. Armstrong. But now it's time for the news bulletins with Sam Francis.
Alex, thank you very much and good evening to you. Just coming up to 2 minutes past 8. Well, following weeks of pressure, the Home Secretary has today announced a major shift in tackling grooming gangs. Yvette Cooper's ordered a nationwide review of evidence with 5 government-backed local inquiries and a rapid 3-month audit. But the review stopped short of a national inquiry, prompting criticism from the Conservative Party and some Labour MPs. Even Elon Musk has weighed in, calling it a step in the right direction, but says results will speak for themselves. Yvette Cooper promised there'll be a clear timetable for action, though, and vowed that shameful progress so far must change.
All those national inquiries, reports and hundreds of recommendations, far too little action has been taken. And shamefully little progress has been made. The most important task should be to increase police investigations into these horrific crimes and get abusers behind bars. We will introduce stronger sentences for child grooming, making it an aggravating factor to organise abuse and exploitation. And I can announce new action today to help victims get more investigations and prosecutions underway.
In other news tonight, an investigation is now underway after convicted murderer Jake Fari, known as rapper 10, recorded music referencing the murder of schoolboy Jimmy Mizzen. The 35-year-old, who was released from prison in June 2023, appears in balaclava-clad videos boasting about violence. One track recently played on BBC Radio includes disturbing lyrics allegedly referencing Jimmy's death. The Conservatives' Robert Jenrick has now called for an apology from the BBC, accusing them of promoting music from a man responsible for a shocking crime. The broadcaster, though, claims it was unaware of the rapper's identity when his tracks were played on air. Well, Jimmy's mother, Margaret Mizzen, told us earlier that she thinks the rap lyrics are absolutely horrendous and she wants answers from the broadcaster.
I think it's absolutely beyond disgraceful. I can't believe that the BBC would do this. Now, I know that at the moment they're saying, well, they didn't know who he was, etc. But there must be ways of looking at these things. You know, perhaps people show their passports with a name or something, but they're making excuses. There's no excuses. They played his music, and you're playing the music of someone who's committed murder.
In other news tonight, Sir Keir Starmer says the UK will play its part in guaranteeing Ukraine's security after a peace deal that says he made his first visit to Kyiv as Prime Minister. His trip comes as Russian drones were targeting the city, a reminder of the daily threats that Ukrainians face. The UK has also unveiled a £4.5 billion military aid package, including cutting-edge air defence systems and training for Ukrainian cadets. Sir Keir Starmer called for peace through strength, warning that weakness could invite more war and embolden aggressors worldwide. And in a historic move, a 100-year UK-Ukraine partnership has been agreed, cementing ties in defence and technology. And before we head back to Alex in Westminster, David Lynch, the Oscar-nominated director of films including Blue Velvet and co-creator of the cult drama series Twin Peaks, has sadly died today at the age of 78. The surrealist filmmaking giant was best known for his blend of unsettling visuals and unique storytelling style, and his family announced his death on social media, writing, "There's now a big hole in the world now that he's no longer with us. But as he would say, keep your eye on the donut and not on the hole." David Lynch, remembered, of course, as one of the greatest directors, dead today at 78. Well, those are the latest headlines. I'll be back with you in an hour. Now, though, it's over to Alex.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Alex Armstrong, covering for Matt Goodwin. Is this the wettest government U-turn yet? Today, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper announced new measures to tackle the grooming gang scandal, including 5 new local inquiries and $5 million in funding. But let's call it what it is: political posturing. But you, the public, aren't easily fooled, are you? You've been demanding a national inquiry because you know, as well as I do, that local ones are simply ineffective and just don't go far enough. Most importantly, they are incapable of connecting the dots across this epidemic that spans up to 50 towns across this country. So how can we trust councils and the police to investigate themselves when they're clearly part of a bigger problem? An independent review into Greater Manchester Police commissioned by Andy Burnham is a good example of this. 2 people resigned from that inquiry last year because allegedly critical information was withheld from them. And what about accountability for those in power who may have covered this up? Well, a GB News poll shows a stark 46% of you agree that there was a cover-up, with only 14% of you disagreeing. And when it comes to prosecution, well, that's even bigger. 80% of you want those public servants who allegedly or may have participated in a cover-up to face justice. 80%. The data couldn't be clearer. We want action, not more empty promises or weak responses. And it begs the question, why is the government so scared to hold these officials accountable? The public are tired of the government sweeping this catastrophe under the carpet. It's time for real action, not more of the same ineffective policies that fail our most vulnerable in society, our children. Now, as always, let me know your views via gbnews.com/yoursay or tweet me at Alex H. Armstrong. I'm joined now by former Met Police Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury. Shabnam, look, obviously this has been a sensational story that's been revisited now from in the last couple of weeks, thanks to people like Elon Musk tweeting about it, GB News publishing that big story about the failure to hold a national inquiry. Surely a national inquiry is going to connect those dots that those local inquiries just can't do. And we desperately need that, don't we?
Well, Alex, they've already had a national inquiry, to be fair. The results of that were published in October 2022. Out of that came 20 recommendations. Not one single one of those were implemented at the time, and certainly haven't been up until recently. The the call that Yvette Cooper's made today, the Home Secretary, in terms of now what she wants to do, actually, I personally welcome that. She's asked for what you call 5 pilot areas to be reviewed to begin with. And I think that's a really good starting point, because if you go nationally and then you start asking all these type of questions and you find that actually if you'd have stuck to those particular 5 areas, you could have started shaping it, start forming it. It will make some informed decisions. And then when they do decide to roll it out nationally, if they do, not a public inquiry, as we say, it will be locally based inquiries. It means that that allows all the different areas that have perhaps not had the opportunity to be able to shape those 5 particular areas and get the answers that they want. As you said yourself, at the heart of this are all those victims, and that is a key issue here.
Yeah, well, and this, for me, this is always about the victims. I know I've made loads of statements here on GB News saying that I feel like political parties are playing football with this. They're using the victims as some sort of political tool to get their latest news beat out. But for me, it really feels like a national inquiry hasn't been done. You know, the child sexual assault inquiry was only looking at 5 cases, some of which were reported to not actually have, large-scale grooming gangs in them, at least. So how can we say we've had a national inquiry when it's been so heavily criticised for not looking into those areas?
Well, they did an inquiry for 7 years, Alex, and it cost £200 million. Over 7,000 victims were spoken to with regards to their views, how they felt.
But there were broad views, though. It was not just about grooming gangs, was it? It was about multiple other sexual offences.
Well,
yes.
If you look at what's gone on in relation to the inquiry, a lot of people are complaining that rightly so, that many of these grooming gangs were of Pakistani descent, but in actual fact, only 3% of the British population were from that section of the background, those particular backgrounds. A particular part of the recommendations was to look at data and was to look at demographics. If they'd have actually done that 2 years ago, you might have a much broader and bigger picture of the demographics of the background of those particular individuals.
Absolutely, and you've been in the police, so you understand this. Why haven't we done this? Is it political will? Are the Tories at fault here for not implementing reforms earlier?
Well, look, it's not a question of, for me to answer why they didn't do it. That's a question that the Conservatives needed to answer. They were given 20 serious recommendations and they did absolutely nothing with it. It's all very well for people to stand up, start screaming and shouting right now. The important issue here is that those recommendations are made, that they're implemented, and those pilot schemes are implemented immediately. Yvette Cooper has also promised to have an outline of the plan by the beginning of April, so Easter time. So hopefully there will be a much more a better plan in terms of how they move forward to ensure that perpetrators are brought to justice, because that is one of the issues. 89% of victims from sexual offences do not get the opportunity to have those perpetrators convicted or brought to justice.
Absolutely.
And they're the areas that need to be addressed.
We certainly do need to do that. I'm massively in favour of it. But is there not a question here about those people that need to be held accountable, who may have been in positions of authority, that may have been part of a cover-up? 80%. 80 is a huge majority of the public want to see prosecutions against those people. Why are the government running scared?
I don't think it's a case of the government running scared. I think the fact is that they should have been held to account from the outset. Now, whether this is a cover-up or whether it's incompetence, those people need to be identified and they need to be held to account.
How do we do that? How do we do that, though?
Well, I think these inquiries, the recommendations that have actually come out, unfortunately, when you do inquiries of this sort of nature, it's not always a case of somebody will be held to account. But I think that when they bring this mandatory reporting into place in terms of those areas, local authorities, police officers, police forces, the National Police Chiefs Council, for example, if they don't hold to account those that are responsible, then there needs to be further action. I personally agree that they should be held to account and people's heads need to roll, so to speak.
No, I absolutely do agree with you on that. And what I think was disappointing for me was that the Home Secretary didn't make that a larger thing as part of her, announcement today. I think the public really do want to see some accountability, Shabnam, and I know you agree, but we've got to get there at some point. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's been great to hear from you. OK, thank you, Shabnam. Joining me now is Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner Donna Jones. Thank you, Donna. Lovely to see you. Pleasure to have you on my screens, Donna. Look, 14 years, we heard from Shabnam there, 14 years the Tories had to get this right. Donna, in your current role now, what has led to this so-called, culture of cover-up. You've been working with the police for a while. Tell me what it's like from your perspective.
Well, Alex, I'm really disappointed today about yet another opportunity missed by the Labour government and by the Labour Home Secretary to do what's right for these poor women who are living with some of the worst kind of crimes that could ever be committed against them. They are truly abhorrent. Young Laura Wilson was stabbed over 40 times, murdered, and her body was dumped in a river. Her assailant was one of the grooming gangs from Rochdale, and he's now behind bars, thankfully. So to answer your question, well, what's gone wrong? Well, for me, I think there are a couple of things here. First of all, the Professor J report that keeps being referred to with the 30 recommendations, it was not a national public inquiry. It was a national review, and it was on all sexual offending across Great Britain. It did not go specifically into grooming gangs of Pakistani men targeting young white girls, children as young as 11, children being gang raped, being imprisoned, having petrol poured on them. These were truly horrific crimes. So for me, the most important thing we can refer to, if we're looking back over history, was the Baroness Casey review that was done in 2015, where she called out the targeting of young white girls by Pakistani men and these grooming gangs. Now, the only good thing to come out of today is the fact that Yvette Cooper has said that she is going to go back to Baroness Casey and ask her to do an audit on the ethnicity and to draw down some more detail into the ethnicity and what it, let's call out what it is. That's really important. Now, for me, 5 individual locally council-led inquiries across the country. Why not have a national inquiry? £5 million is a lot of money. Perhaps a national inquiry might end up costing £20 million. But if I can just answer, Alex, why I think that's important, and here it is. If you had different circumstances, you had children's home sexual abuse in Rotherham, you had young girls with taxi drivers in Telford, you had girls of all different ethnicities, background and ages in Rochdale, then of course there is no commonality. But there is absolute commonality amongst what happened over a 10-year period and we believe could still be happening in this country right now. That's why it needs to be a national public inquiry. And my final point is that the previous Professor J review, national review, it wasn't a public inquiry. No social worker, no police officer, no public servant was compelled to come and give evidence, and nor were any of the Labour councillors involved in the cover-up.
That still happened. That lack of compelling witnesses is still going to be the case today, I believe, Donna. So we're still not there, are we? We're still not there. We still won't get the actual answers we need. So, I mean, look, do you think Labour are running scared for being accountable, for people within the Labour Party being accountable? Is that why they won't do this national inquiry? They're worried about people of authority that may be within the Labour Party being held accountable by the public?
I think it's one of two things. It's either money, because it could probably end up costing upwards of probably £20 million for a national public inquiry. It would probably take best part of 5 years, if not longer, because of the 50 towns and cities that we know are involved. Or it's because of the political fallout that these were towns and cities that were Labour-controlled, Labour politicians involved, Labour politicians looking the other way. And if you want my honest opinion about that, I suspect it's the latter, and that's very disappointing.
Yeah, it certainly is. Do you think with Kemi Badenoch as Tory party leader now that the Tories will be able to regain that trust? Because, 14% of the public, is it 14%, something along those lines, or 16% put the Tories third when they trust with what party should be able to hold a national inquiry. Do you think the Tories can get that back?
Well, look, when Suella Braverman was Home Secretary, I spoke to her at length about this. I've done quite a lot of research on this over the last 3 or 4 years that I've been a Police and Crime Commissioner. And I know that she travelled up to Rotherham and she met with the victims, and she ordered a national review of this work. That led to 500 men being arrested and hundreds of them being charged, who are now behind bars serving hundreds and hundreds of years in prison. Do I think more could have been done? Yes. Do I think more should have been done? Yes. If there is no public inquiry and the Conservatives are back in power in 4.5 years' time, I really hope that a Conservative Prime Minister would be ordering a public inquiry into what is one of the biggest scandals that this country has seen in all of our lifetimes.
I couldn't agree more with you. Thank you so much for coming on, Donna, to give us your perspective there. After the break, we're going to be asking whether the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal will finally bring an end to the Palestine protests wreaking havoc on our streets.
is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Ironic article in The Guardian, Nick, caring about facts.
Yeah, this is Meta is ushering in a world without facts, says Nobel Peace Prize winner. And they just seem to give these Nobel Peace Prizes to anyone these days. So it's Maria Ressa.
Not working.
Zuckerberg came out, and it was very bold. He said a few things. We're going to use community notes instead of fact checkers. Fact checkers in inverted commas, it just means people pushing usually a specific viewpoint. Community notes seems to be a great system that X uses, so why not do that? I think that's great. He's going to reduce restrictions on topics like immigration and gender. Good, because I'm against censorship. He's going to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more, which is great. He's also moving content moderation to Texas instead of California, which is banter. So now the cynical version is he just realises we've got a new regime, it's the MAGA era, and I want to be mates with Trump, who said that I should that if I interfere with the 2024 election, he should spend the rest of his life in prison. So he did mention he might be a bit scared of that. He was involved in that in Facebook suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, and I feel that he didn't like being a part of all that from watching.
And also the suppression of arguments about gender and sex, what is biological sex and whatnot. You get banned for saying there are two sexes.
They were on the wrong side of this, and now he's correcting. But the weird thing is the people, of course, the people who don't like this, the lefties, this person, Ressa, is saying that this is a big problem. It's an extremely dangerous time. I've seen all this from the lefties. They just call it disinformation. They're worried about this because to them it's disinformation. To other people it's information.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think we can all agree if people think they're getting their facts just directly from Facebook, then something's horribly wrong. But we know that. The community notes thing, I think, is quite good because that's sort of first-hand experience people are putting down, aren't they?
Yeah. People have loads of different views come together, and it's an aggregate, so that's why it works.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Alex Armstrong. We've been discussing the grooming gang epidemic and the Home Secretary's statement today. I want to get some of your views in here. John says around 1 million girls nationwide. I dare say a full national inquiry would encourage many more to come forward who might not have done, and had there been a few more local inquiries. Another viewer says town-based inquiries will not get to the bottom of the cover-up. They will not be able to force people to attend. They will not have the powers to force data to be given to them. Telford cost 9 million. 5 towns will get 5 million between them. Kevin says this is lip service, quite disgraceful. This audit and underfunded local inquiries are a pitiful offering. OK, well, moving on now. After 15 months of war in Gaza and the wider Middle East region, a ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel has finally been struck, which will see the withdrawal of Israeli forces and the release of hostages held by Hamas. But tonight, I wanted to ask, what does this mean for Britain? For months, we've seen these weekly marches on our streets, including groups calling for jihad and a rise in anti-Semitism and even fights with the police. So, will we finally see an end to this phenomenon that began before the Israelis had even retaliated to the October 7th attacks? I'm joined now by my fantastic panel, former Conservative Minister Steve Baker and founder of Navarro Media, Aaron Bastani. Aaron, I'd like to start with you. Look, this thing has been going on for a while. Are the public going to be completely dismayed and fed up? And is the pro-Palestine movement going to go the same way Just Stop Oil has if these marches continue past a ceasefire? I think Just Stop Oil is rather different in so much as that was a vanguardist small group trying to attract the media spotlight. Whereas these marches, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, have had very large numbers of people participating, often from all walks of life across the country, young, old, various races and ethnic groups and so on. And I think often it's portrayed in the media as these are young Muslims, which is what it looks like in London, for instance. But my local church in Portsmouth, 600 metres from where I live, has had regular cake sales for medical supplies in Palestine. So I think the whole...
But those aren't protests, though. They're not disrupting anybody. So I think when we're talking about, like, some of the protests in London have been disruptive. They've closed down streets. They've stopped people from shopping. I saw the Apple Store was being blockaded not that long ago. You know, what I'm saying is people will lose support when they feel like the issue has been dealt with, surely.
It's an interesting question. I mean, personally, look, I'm on the left. I have no problem with protests. When you had, you know, the Countryside Alliance Mark II with the farmers' protest recently, I was quite sympathetic to a lot of what they were saying. I have no problem with it. And I suppose what you're saying is... I remember having this conversation with Jacob Rees-Mogg once. He said, you know, if it's 1 million people and they shut down the streets of London, he has a utilitarian sort of point of view. He said, well, I understand. There's 1 million people, they feel strongly, fine. If 20 people do it, that's not good. And I suppose that was his critique of Just Stop Oil. So I think this is a little bit different. But you're right, if the political context changes, which it seems to have done, then obviously people's protests and their tactics need to change as well.
Yeah, Steve, do you agree? Should the protests stop now? Have we had enough of them? You know, your Tories were in for a while. We didn't stop them, didn't shut them down, despite Suella Braverman calling them hate marches, calling for them to be shut down. What do you think should happen next?
Well, I would hope that the protests will stop because the message has been loud and clear and well received. But it has to be said that the release of hostages is a very, very good thing, and peace coming is a very, very good thing. But what I think would satisfy those people who have been marching, whose hearts are in the right place, because, of course, many of the people who marched, as you've said, their hearts were not in the right place. But what would satisfy the good people of Wickham, who I used to represent, the people who I respect in Wickham who may have gone to the marches, is a two-state solution. And that is a long-standing position of successive governments. And I think the reality is, until there's a lasting settlement for peace so that Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in two viable states, we're going to keep coming back to this issue.
Yeah, and I think, look, you know, there's a lot of critique of Kemi Badenoch's language. She was calling, you know, for people from grooming gang backgrounds, from peasant backgrounds the other day. Robert Jenrick has also used quite strong words. And these marches maybe have exposed, you know, community divisions, let's say that, between certain parts of the British public. Do you think Kemi Badenoch is inflaming the situation? Do you think she's right?
I don't think she's inflaming the situation. I think that she is trying to navigate an extremely difficult set of circumstances. But look, I want to be absolutely clear that when it comes to the grooming gangs, zero tolerance is the right way forward. People are right to be outraged. The single question that must be answered is, was there two-tier justice? That's the question that the previous national inquiry didn't answer.
Yeah.
But the problem is we end up with a conflation of issues here. And the reality that I know from representing Wickham, where 22% of the public are British Asians, and the vast majority of them are Pakistani Muslims, is that the overwhelming majority of the public, of all sections of the community, are decent, law-abiding people who just want peace and decency and virtue and get on with their lives. And it's always the minority who tarnish the reputation of the rest.
Very loud minorities it normally is, right? Aaron, you know, do you think we need to investigate whether there's been two-tier justice done here? Is Steve right?
In regards to the grooming gangs?
Yeah, no. We're not talking about that just yet. We're talking about the Palestine-Israel protests on the streets. Have the police acted fairly?
I think so. I think there's clearly a view within the Home Office and within the Metropolitan Police Service to, with political protests, not necessarily inflame things, even if it means not going by the letter of the law. And I think that's probably wise. You know, in the last 3 to 4 years, we've had COVID, we've had the cost of living crisis. In a way, it says a lot about this country that we haven't had much worse protests. So I think the emphasis in recent years is to not create a public order situation in central London. That hasn't happened. There were, you know, these riots, one would argue, in August. But other than that, actually, I'm remarkably surprised
that there's been the tranquility and public order that there has been, given the headwinds people have been subject to in this country. I think it's a real credit to the British public.
Well, let's say these protests carry on. And would you, as I was just saying to Steve there, Kemi Badenoch's language has been criticised, Robert Jenrick's been criticised. They come out stronger than Reform on this in some cases. Do you think that's inflating?
Haven't they?
Well, do you think it's inflaming tensions? Do you think that people taking to the streets will be more angry with the Conservatives than they will with Reform at this point in time?
Well, they've got to. I mean, what's the Conservative...
Why have they got to?
Well, without me, I'm not criticising Steve, he's not an MP anymore, but the Conservative brand is bust. And I think on certain issues, they've got to talk to the right of reform on things like immigration, on Gaza, on policing. But I think any sensible person looks at the record over 14 years and says, well, there's clearly a big discrepancy between rhetoric and action. Somebody like Kemi Badenoch, I mean, I believe she had the cabinet brief for women inequalities. At the very moment when you had these 20 recommendations made after 2022, as your previous guest said, not a single one was delivered. So I think sensible people look at that, they don't trust the Conservative Party, and that's why I think you're getting this very provocative rhetoric from people like Badenoch.
Interesting. Well, look, but we have to wrap it up there, but we are going to talk about Kemi Badenoch later on and her track record so far. So stay tuned for that, because you're not going to want to miss that. These guys are going to be here. Thank you to my panel. We'll see you again shortly. In a moment, I'll be asking them, of course, about Kemi Badenoch to see if she can turn it around, or is she flogging a dead horse? And I'll be speaking to a newly defected Tory to Reform councillor as the party surges in the polls. Don't go anywhere.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Across northern areas, likely staying cloudy, windy, but remaining fairly mild. Cooler elsewhere, though those grey skies are sticking around. Also a chance we could see some rain and drizzle, particularly to the far northwest, where we see some frontal systems sweeping in. Also fairly windy here at times too. But elsewhere, high pressure largely holding on. But we do see a shift in our wind direction, more of a southerly. So that's pushing up any cloud from the south into northern parts of Wales, northern parts of England as we head into the overnight period. It should be largely dry, however. That's away from the far northwest, though we'll see outbreaks of rain and drizzle, and also getting rather windy here overnight too, with a risk of gales in the very far north. Largely mild across the northwest, though in any clearer spells it's likely feeling chilly. Across Scotland to start on Friday, a fairly damp start, plenty of cloud around, just a chance we could see some clearer spells in the far east and rather windy across the far northwest coast as well. Also rather windy around western coasts of Northern Ireland, once again fairly cloudy here with some drizzly spots in the far west. Elsewhere across England and Wales, once again largely dry but plenty of cloud around, so a rather grey start to end the week. But through the course of the day there is a chance we could see some brightness just to the northeast of any hills or high ground, but for most it is going to be quite a cloudy end to the week, once again with those outbreaks of rain and drizzle across parts of Scotland, perhaps western parts of Northern Ireland, but elsewhere remaining largely dry. And it's probably going to feel slightly cooler for most. That's away from the far northwest, where once again it's rather mild for the time of year. To start the weekend, once again, plenty of grey skies around, though we could see some brightness towards the afternoon, particularly across parts of Wales. Northern parts of England is the best of any brightness, but still that cloud lingering on across the far southeast of the country. And once again, further outbreaks of rain and drizzle edging into the far northwest. Still plenty of cloud around for the second half of the weekend, which means temperatures are going to struggle, so often feeling chilly.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back, everybody. Well, in a speech in central London today, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch made her first major speech of 2025. This is in a bid to regain the trust of voters.
The public will never trust politicians unless we can admit our mistakes. Labour are making a lot of mistakes. But the difference between me and Keir Starmer is that he doesn't believe that he's ever made a mistake. I will acknowledge the Conservative Party made mistakes.
Interesting. OK. But with Reform UK now ahead of the Tories in one national poll, is there any hope of them securing anything like a majority in the next election? Well, with me again is former Conservative Minister Steve Baker and founder of Navarro Media, Aaron Bastani. Steve, is it just over for the Tories? Is Kemi Badenoch flogging a dead horse? She's falling behind in the popularity polls. We've got Reform surging ahead of the Tories. Now, what's going on?
What's going on is that it's very easy for Nigel Farage to be the popular guy in the pub with all the easy answers. And I watched a speech he made a couple of days ago where he was talking about the need to balance the books, and then he blamed immigration. Immigration needs to be dealt with, but it's not the cause of the problem in the public finances. And this is why he can go ahead, because it's the curse of easy answers. Kemi is turning the Conservative Party around. What I saw today was a speech that was strong and confident and the beginning of a journey. She is going to have to level with the public that we've got to cut spending. That is the lesson. Rachel Reeves knows she's got to cut spending, but she's not going to be able to do it. And I'm afraid we're going to have to go into the next election saying, look at the mess that actually will have been made by Labour. We're going to turn this country around so that we can afford your pension, your health care, your social care. That's going to mean growth. That means lower taxes. So, therefore, we've got to cut spending. And I think she's putting the country and the Conservative Party on that journey. And that's really what I saw today. And I think once Nigel Farage comes under the kind of scrutiny that the Conservative Party gets, I think he'll end up collapsing like a cheap deck chair.
Interesting. Do you think you could ever see that Reform vote ever shift back over to the Tories? I mean, look, they've had more party leaders than I can remember. Most, of recent at least, all the party leaders of the Conservative Party have lasted max 2 years. Since, when was it, David Cameron? And everyone else has lasted 2 years. Is it all over? They just can't get their act together?
There was a really interesting YouGov poll out on Tuesday, I think.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the breakdown of voter preference by age, people 49 and younger, the Tories are basically in single digits.
That's right, they are.
Extraordinary.
Was it 8%?
Well,
amongst people
amongst the
under the 16s,
amongst 18 to 24, it was something like 8%, and then maybe even lower. And then amongst people below 49 and 24 to 49, it was something like 13, 14. So you put it together.
And under 16s, Reform was on top dog there, wasn't it?
Well, what's interesting is younger people still like left parties. They like Labour, they like the Greens, but some young people have always been inclined to vote for the right-wing parties, but that support for the Conservatives has collapsed. And the question is, does that carry on through as they get older? I personally think the Conservative brand is toast. I think what you're saying about Farage is somewhat true in so much as once he has, like any politician, a certain amount of scrutiny, his deficiencies we found out, I think it's quite possible that happens when he's in some kind of government, actually. And
that's what's happening for Keir Starmer. Well, he didn't get the due scrutiny. Yeah. And now it's coming out all this stuff, whether he's done all these things in government that he promised he would do. Yeah. Now he's coming under scrutiny. We just don't seem to have the mechanisms there to hold the people to account anymore.
Well, two things. I'll be quick. First of all, the liberal media, the BBC and The Guardian, don't want to scrutinise Keir Starmer.
That's a good point. I agree with that.
And then the second, I'm not meant to say that as the lefty, but it's true.
It's refreshing, Aaron.
Well, it's refreshing. It's true, sorry. Yeah. And then the second bit is I think Kemi Badenoch said she's on the start of you said she's on the start of a journey. I think she'd like that to be the case. Counterintuitively, Labour being so bad is maybe a problem for the Conservatives. They can't rethink their project. They can't kind of reassess where they want to be in government. And all of a sudden, Kemi Badenoch, rather than having 18 months to kind of,
get her feet under the desk,
reconfigure the project, actually, people are saying, are you ready to be the next PM?
Well, OK, Steve, this is important because Kemi's come out and said, no policies until 2027, right? How can you be in opposition and not have a single policy to oppose the government with?
Well, I think the truth is the public aren't very interested in the policies of the opposition.
Do you not think so?
No, I don't think so. I think we've got to be clear when the government is failing, and we've got to be clear what the correct response would be. But that doesn't mean we need to set out a policy programme now. Let's not forget, it's 4 years to the next general election. They'll probably hold it in spring in about 4 years.
Is there going to be a leadership in 2?
No, there really shouldn't be, and it would be madness to have a leadership election. But if I may, I just want to return to the problems of the Conservative Party and young people. There's 2 issues there for me. 1, housing. 2, young people aren't Conservatives, they're Libertarians, if they're thinking about the right at all. And this is what we need to engage with, is that the right solution actually for our country is we need to make housing affordable and available for young people, and we need to be more oriented towards freedom. And if we do those two things, the Conservative Party will become attractive to young people.
So do you think the party just got so caught up in its own political drama that it forgot to actually serve the country, the young people?
So since 2010, the Conservative Party has been coping. So I don't think David Cameron and George Osborne expected to win in 2015. They thought they were a one-term government to sort out the fiscal crisis. And we've just got to start believing in what we stand for.
Interesting. Well, what do you guys think at home? Please get in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. Well, it's no secret that Reform UK have been targeting Tories for defections. Today, Suella Braverman refused to rule out a Reform defection. Interesting. We heard the news of the leader of Glasgow Council Conservatives, Thomas Kerr, defecting to Reform last week. And Norfolk Councillor Robin Hunter-Clark is going to join me now. He is a recent defector too. Robin, thank you so much for joining us. Now, look, Farage is up in the polls. Reform is second in some polls coming out. Are you just riding the coattails of Nigel Farage, or are you defecting for more than that?
Well, good evening, Alex. No, I'm afraid it's a lot more than that. I've given the Conservative Party every chance to change, every single step of the way. But what really did it for me, and you will have seen this in the press over the last few days, is the Conservative Party teaming up with Labour in an attempt to cancel democracy with the upcoming county council elections. And I witnessed that at County Hall last Thursday. And I told them also, you're a bunch of cowards. You know, you can't just cancel elections because you fear of Reform and of Nigel Farage. So the day after they did that, I phoned Nigel up and I joined the party. And, you know, Reform is the way forward. This country needs reform. And that's what I'm absolutely focused on now.
Yeah, you know, look, a lot of people are criticising Kemi Badenoch's leadership at the moment. So is it right to say that she didn't inspire you as leader? Why did you hang on so long to the Tories if that's the case?
She's totally useless, Alex. What I love about the Conservative Party, and still do, is its members and its very hard-working councillors. And I've got no criticism of those people, but I'm afraid the Parliamentary Party has totally lost touch with the membership. You know, effectively, the vast majority of them are effectively Liberal Democrats. They're not Conservative. The Conservative Party is dead. And I very much hope that I'm able to now encourage good Conservatives with a small c to come and join Reform and join the fight.
What would it take for a councillor like you to reverse your decision to join Reform and to join Nigel Farage? What will it take for the Tories to win back those votes? Because there's a lot of criticism of Kemi Badenoch saying she's alienating potential Reform defectors who may be on the brink. She's attacking Nigel Farage. Is she doing the right thing by attacking Nigel?
You're doing absolutely the wrong thing. And I've told them so. They should not attack Reform, because Reform, people voting Reform, are their former voters. So I'm afraid, Alex, it's over. I made a speech the other evening at one of the Reform conferences, and I told the delegates the Conservative Party is dead. They perhaps don't know it yet, but I can assure you it is. And people are joining Reform from the Conservatives and from Labour in their droves, because they want to see Reform. They want to see Nigel Farage as the next Prime Minister. I said at the conference in my speech, a year ago, if people had said that Nigel Farage had a shot at becoming Prime Minister, people would have laughed a year ago. They're not laughing now.
No, that's one of Nigel's favourite lines. And just a very quick word, do you think more councillors are going to defect?
Yes, and there are many people privately in the Conservative Party who want to defect or are considering defecting. And I'm in talks with a lot of them right now. So we've just got to wait and see. But this movement is real. The momentum is behind us. Change is coming.
OK, thank you so much for joining us, Robin. Now, after the break, as Rachel Reeves faces accusations of crashing the economy, I'll be speaking to a business leader who's called for a general election. See you then.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
It's been an unsettled week across parts of the Mediterranean, and there's some further very wet and windy weather to come for some places, especially around Sardinia, towards Italy and Greece. Also, Algeria and Tunisia having some very heavy thunderstorms. Some places could see rainfall totals building up in excess of 300 millimetres with strong winds and even some hill snow to go with it. Away from this, though, a lot of relatively fine, often sunny and quite warm weather too. Bye-bye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lauren, let's start with this, shall we? How children's TV may be harming, not helping young minds.
Yeah, so this is an article in the Express today, a big double-page spread as a result of some new research in a new book that's coming out by a child psychologist, saying that children's television, and I think perhaps more importantly, the way that children consume television and video product now is perhaps not as healthy for them as we would hope it would be. And there's quite some distance from children's television of the past, of the sort of the Bagpuss and Clangers and Ivor the Engine era. And I think what's interesting about this is particularly the how children's television is consumed angle, because children are now put in front of screens significantly more often than they were, certainly when I think we were growing up. The content that they are consuming is not great for their brains and their learning and development, which Floella Benjamin of children's television fame is now leading a big crusade to say that some of this is really, really bad for children.
These days, they're not watching the TV that we all watched when we were growing up. They're not even watching GB News in the morning.
What are they thinking?
Would you believe it? But they are watching this absolute drivel all day long on YouTube, and because obviously all our TVs are now connected to the internet, or they're getting TikTok on their TV. It's not even, so they don't even necessarily have to have smartphones or iPads. They can just watch this stuff on TV, and it is rubbish. They are watching it and they're obsessed with it. Oh God, Skibbity Toilet or something. Have you heard of this?
No.
No? Well, you'll have viewers who have got who are parents of sort of 13-year-olds, and this Skibbity Toilet thing is, they're all obsessed with it, and this is a really annoying sort of theme tune or thing that they sing at you.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
How many times have you heard the Labour Party claim growth is its #1 ambition? Well, today's news shows precisely the opposite, doesn't it? Not only did Labour take the fastest growth in the G7 to 0 in the third quarter last year, but today's figures show we had a meagre 0.1% of growth in November last year. Why are people celebrating this? It's insane. But my next guest, a business leader and former political donor, Philip Ullman, has claimed Labour has taken us into a state of stagflation, low growth and higher inflation, claiming a general election may be necessary if it comes to it. Philip, thank you for joining us today. Why are you calling for a general election because of these economic situations?
As I see it, neither party is actually dealing with the real problems that society is facing. We've got massive inflation. They say 0.1%, but it's actually much more closer to 30%. We all know that. If you look at the... You have to remember, inflation doesn't go backwards, it's always adding on.
Going up.
And we all know when we go to the shops, not that I go to shops that often, that prices are massively inflated. And that is causing immense suffering. It means people can't afford to put food on the table. It means that not only do they get punished by consumer price inflation, you've also got the mortgage, which has gone up. We all know that we had long-term low interest rates. And suddenly, interest rates have climbed to 5%. People can't afford the mortgage. And nobody is actually dealing with the elephant in the room. And that was Conservatives previously, now Labour. Liz Truss had no idea. And effectively, she troubled the markets. And effectively, as we know, Kazi Kardeng went first. And she followed shortly after. We now have even less confidence in Rachel Reeves. The yields are greater than they were.
Well, this is a really good point, Philip, right? So, I mean, we should... I mean, you can call for a general election, but surely resignations have got to start. If we're going to hold Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng to the same standards, then Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister should go as well?
I don't think there's any doubt about that, effectively. If it's worse than what caused the demise of it. And effectively, the only party, I hate to say it, that's actually starting to address it is Rupert Lowe in Reform, who's starting to say, 1 minute, there's a problem with quantitative easing, there's a problem with money. So they're starting to look at the issue, and neither of the other parties are even touching or addressing it. They're just saying, what does Kemi say today? She says, I'm apologising. But that's not a policy.
Absolutely not. I mean, is this... to pick up your Reform point, you know, Reform is made up of business people. Nigel's had a very successful career. Rupert Lowe, also a very successful career. Richard Tye, successful career. Is that the difference? Is it because they've got a political party of people who've been outside of, you know, being just career politicians?
So Nigel is the character, the greatest politician, as far as I can see, that we've had in our era, in this country, certainly. He's nimble. It's a party that doesn't have the bureaucracy of either the Conservatives or Labour. Rupert Lowe and others are actually dealing with the real issues. They can turn them a sixpence because of the structure.
But is that just rhetoric, though? Because, you know, many would argue that the Reform manifesto wasn't properly costed. So is that rhetoric, or is it just a change where the party's position is today?
No, I think Nigel is bright, and I think Nigel will listen. And Nigel will engage with people to work out what the real problem is. And the real problem is, as he says, people can't put food on the table. He keeps saying that. People can't afford the mortgages. No one's listening to them. I think Nigel will listen, and he's nimble, and he hasn't got the bureaucracy of either the Conservatives or Labour.
And is that an internal party problem you think they have there, that Labour want to spend, and the Tories want to perhaps cut a little bit? But are they big state now as well, the Tories, since 2019?
I can't see any policy
than the former 10 years before that.
Well, I can't see any policy coming out of Kemi at all, out of the Conservatives. Labour, no policy really either. All they say growth. And what they do, they increase employees' national insurance, which is actually going to cause more inflation.
It's the worst tax.
It's the worst thing. And why? I've no idea why, because no one understands why. So we've got two parties just wandering around aimlessly.
Is this because they don't understand what they mean by working people? I know that word's thrown around a lot. I don't even know what it means, frankly. But is it because they just don't get the underlying parts of the economy, that it's driven by people, it's driven by confidence? And, you know, my criticism of the Labour Party is that you can't tax your way to growth. But Labour are claiming we need to tax people, and we need to keep these taxes up so we can invest in infrastructure that they claim the Tories have crippled the economy and they've crippled the country. The NHS is in dire state. Is there not a case to be saying that, well, we need to give Labour a chance?
Well, they've had their chance. They've put together a set of ideas, which is increasing employers' NI, which is a tax on jobs, which is going to cause inflation, which is going to cause unemployment. And that's to achieve growth. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And therefore, we've got a lack of any kind of ideas. The elephant in the room is inflation, unemployment. People are not being looked after. And if we don't deal with this, we're going to have more social unrest. And Nigel can start to address it. He's got a blank sheet of paper. We can see in the opinion polls he's moving forward. And I think we need change, and people are fed up.
Well, just maybe a last word from you on this one. What would you say is the number one thing that needs to be done today in order to reverse some of the damage done to the economy and the spiralling charts, the graph's going out of control?
So we talk about quantitative easing, but the big problem is banks create money. And that's massively inflationary. We have to limit the amount of money in the economy. I suggest we do it based on the number of people.
Okay.
And therefore, not a gold standard, a people standard. I'm writing more and more about this, and you see it on my website, themanajourney.com. But we need a fresh set of eyes. We made big mistakes in the past. It's time to start again.
Philip, thank you so much for your thoughts. We really appreciate it. Coming up next is Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what have you got on your show this evening,
Alex, you really suit that 8 p.m. slot, mate. Anyway, let's get ready to rumble. It's the Runcorn Rocky. It's the Hellsby Hellraiser. Yes, that's right. Labour MP Mike Amesbury has finally admitted that he did actually batter a constituent. You couldn't make it up, could you? Sadiq Khan, I think he's a nasty piece of work, and I've got a clip to prove it. Yvette Cooper has conceded to GBNews viewers and decided that she's going to launch an inquiry into grooming gangs. And the BBC has decided to promote the music of a man who killed a teenager. So it's all going off tonight, mate.
Wow, that sounds like a bombshell show, Patrick. I hope everyone's tuning in. But that's all from me tonight. Coming up after this is your weather, and I'm going to be back with you tomorrow night on State of the Nation. So see you then. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned to Patrick.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Across northern areas, likely staying cloudy, windy, but remaining fairly mild. Cooler elsewhere, though those grey skies are sticking around. Also a chance we could see some rain and drizzle, particularly to the far northwest, where we see some frontal systems sweeping in. Also fairly windy here at times too. But elsewhere, high pressure largely holding on. But we do see a shift in our wind direction, more of a southerly, so that's pushing up any cloud from the south into northern parts of Wales, northern parts of England as we head into the overnight period. It should be largely dry, however, that's away from the far northwest, though we'll see outbreaks of rain and drizzle, and also getting rather windy here overnight too, with a risk of gales in the very far north. Largely mild across the northwest, though in any clearer spells it's likely feeling chilly. Across Scotland to start on Friday, a fairly damp start, plenty of cloud around, just a chance we could see some clearer spells in the far east and rather windy across the far northwest coast as well. Also rather windy around western coasts of Northern Ireland, once again fairly cloudy here with some drizzly spots in the far west. Elsewhere across England and Wales, once again largely dry but plenty of cloud around, so a rather grey start to end the week. But through the course of the day there is a chance we could see some brightness just to the northeast of any hills or high ground, but for most it is going to be quite a cloudy end to the week, once again with those outbreaks of rain and drizzle